Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today we're pleased to present How to Build Products Customers Love. I'm Jeanette DePatty from the Lean Startup Conference happening November 16th through 19th in San Francisco. Visit leanstartup.co for more information. Our speakers today are Dan Olson and Kirsten Cluthy, who will be moderating questions from the audience. Dan is a Lean Startup consultant and author who loves all things product. He is glad to have his life back after spending the past year writing the Lean Product Playbook, which was just published by Wiley. At Olson Solutions, Dan works with CEOs and product leaders to help them build great products and strong product teams, often as interim VP of product. Dan has worked with companies large and small on a wide variety of web and mobile products. His clients include Facebook, Box, Microsoft, Medallia, and One Medical Group. Prior to consulting, Dan worked at Intuit, where he led the Quicken product team to record record sales and profit. He also led product management at social networking pioneer Friendster and was the co-founder and CEO of TechCrunch award winner Your Version, a personalized news startup. Dan also hosts the Lean Product and Lean UX Silicon Valley Meetup. He holds engineering degrees from Northwestern and Virginia Tech and an MBA from Stanford. Kirsten Cluthy is our editorial director for the 2015 Lean Startup Conference. I'm going to start with a few housekeeping notes. We'll take questions from the audience via the live chat. If you'd like to ask a question, please flag it with a Q followed by a colon. The speakers will answer questions in the second half of the webcast, so there's no need to ask your questions twice. And this is approximately a 1-hour program. The recording will be available a few days after this live webcast. Take it away, Kirsten.
Thanks, Jeanette. Dan, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to be talking to you and getting a preview of what you're going to talk about at the conference. And Jeanette just ran through a list of your experience and your background, but I'd love to get a little bit of context, and if you can tell us a little bit about how you got to the Lean Startup methodology.
Sure. Thanks, Kirsten. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about speaking at the Lean Startup Conference and talking with you today a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. So I basically have a tech background. I've been coding since I was a kid, and then I moved out to Silicon Valley to go to business school and knew I wanted to get into product management. And I asked everybody around, where's the best place to learn product management, and everyone said Intuit. So I went to Intuit, and I learned a lot about customer-centric development and UX design and market research. And then after leaving Intuit, I pretty much worked at startups, and I stumbled into consulting to companies as an interim VP of product. And that's around the time that Eric Ries came out with the Lean Startup, and it brought together a lot of powerful ideas, and he added a lot of new ideas, and it just really resonated with me. Like, fundamentally, it was trying to make the art of building products more of a science and less of an art. And so that really resonated with me as an engineering background and the practices that I had practice in the companies that I was at. So I was really excited about that. And actually, before I moved out to the Valley, I studied at Virginia Tech Industrial Engineering, and some of the classes I studied were about lean manufacturing. So when he was applying those concepts to software development, it made complete sense to me. I was really excited about that.
So then what led you to start writing the book? Did you find gaps, or what was the inspiration?
Well, I always, I started giving talks in 2007. The first one I did, Professor B.J. Fogg here at Stanford, when Facebook opened their app platform, he did a class with Dave McClure. I came in. It's the first time I ever made slides, and since then I've been giving more and more talks and sharing best practices and ideas, and I really like doing that. And in my talks with the audience and in consulting, I found there were a lot of people that were really excited about Lean Startup, and there were a bunch of people who were excited about it, highly motivated. They got the high-level ideas, but then when they went back to their company and tried to apply the ideas, they ran into challenges. And so I basically, as part of my consulting and my talks, like, focus on tactically, like, how do you actually do this? And so that's why I wanted to write a book. That's why it's called the Playbook. It actually walks you through step by step. So if you're bought into basically the ideas, it walks you through how to do that. And the analogy I think of is a lot of times, like, January 1st, people want to get in better shape, so they join a gym, and they buy their workout clothes, they show up at the gym, and they get there and they have no idea what to do. It's not because they're not motivated, it's just they don't know the details of what they're supposed to do. So that's why I wrote the book. And also, as a career product manager, I just wanted to kind of write a comprehensive book that covers everything you need to know to build great products. So it also includes agile development, UX design, and things like that.
So what are some of the challenges that you see companies struggle with in trying to adopt Lean Startup and also in trying to execute on it?
Yeah, I think a few things you see people jumping in and building too soon. The reality is you can actually test your hypotheses in a lot of different ways without actually having to build a product. And so Lean fundamentally is about eliminating waste and making sure that you're spending your resources in a valuable fashion. And so not building too soon is a good way to do that. The other thing is I think a lot of times people don't get clear on who their target customer is. And then related to that, not getting crystal clear on what is the problem we're actually solving for the customer, right? It's too easy to just jump in and start building a product and then see where you're at and see how it's doing without actually doing a lot of thinking steps in advance. And then the last thing I'd probably say is probably biting off more scope than they need to. It's like, okay, well, our V1 product's going to have all these bells and whistles, all these things. It just has to, versus being a devil's advocate and saying, wait, do we really need all that? What's the core of what we're trying to build here with this product?
So I know that there are a lot of layers in between the things that you just talked about. There are a lot of details, and it's going to be too much to get into today. But there are a couple of things that I think that we should touch upon that I'd love to know more about. So your book starts with a framework for product market fit. Can you talk a little bit about that? So I think that's where everybody sort of needs to start.
Yeah, and that at the end of the day, to sum up my book, is basically like how to achieve product market fit. And the interesting thing about that, is Mark Andreessen coined that term back in 2007 in a blog post, and everyone uses that term, but there really isn't like a formal definition if you look online or you look anywhere. And so I basically, in writing this book, realized, hey, if we're going to try to achieve product market fit, we need kind of an actionable model that we can use in that process. So I'm going to switch over to that slide. That's the book, actually. That's the cover of the book. I don't know if it's showing up yet. You guys can see it, the Lean Product Playbook. It's got a whiteboard cover. And then, so I created this framework called the Product Market Fit Pyramid to explain product market fit that we can actually use in our process, right? And it starts with the market, and there's two parts to the market. The first is the target customer, like who are you actually building this product for? Who is the intended user of this?
Actually, we can't see the slide. I don't know if sorry.
Oh, you know what? I didn't hit.
Sorry.
User error. Hold on.
I just want to make sure we don't move too fast.
Thank you. No, I didn't hit. It helps if you click share screen. Sorry.
Fantastic.
I can see it, but you guys can't see it.
There we go.
Sorry about that. So, can you see the book now?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So that's the book. It's got like a whiteboard cover. And this is the product market fit pyramid. It's the five-part framework that I came up for product market fit. All right, so now you can see hopefully the market at the bottom, the target. It all begins with a target customer. Who is the person that you're actually trying to build this product for? And then the next layer, very closely related to that, is what are their underserved needs? So we want to make sure that we're solving the needs that that customer has, and more specifically, which I talk about in the book, and I'll be talking about in my talk at the conference, their underserved needs. Which are the needs that aren't being met as well as they could be? And so together, those form a market. That's basically the market of those two layers. And this is a hierarchical model, so the needs are a function of the customer. If you change the customer, then everything above that changes. Now, the product is the top part of the pyramid. It's three layers. The bottom one is the value proposition. This is how is your product better or different than the other products that are out there. Second, the feature set, like what's the functionality that's actually going to deliver those benefits that you're trying to deliver with your product to your target customer. And then finally, what's the user experience that's delivering those features and functionality? So those top three layers together form your product, and product market fit is just how well in sync and how well do the top and bottom parts of that pyramid resonate. So that's basically an actionable model that forms the foundation for the book. And from there, we basically go right into a process, because each of these layers in the product market fit pyramid is a bunch of hypotheses, right? This Lean Startup is all about articulating your hypotheses, getting explicit about what they are, and identifying cheap, fast ways to test them. And so we start at the bottom with identifying your target customer and work your way through the pyramid, and then there's just an additional step where you actually test with customers. And so that's the Lean product process. You can see here on the slide where we walk through those. And it's an iterative process where you're testing your hypotheses and iterating as you go through that.
So that's the six-step Lean product process that you talk about in the book.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. And so there's a chapter on each of the steps, so I go really in depth. There are a lot of examples. There's over 50 figures and tables to go through that.
So your book also goes in depth into identifying and understanding customer needs, and I think there's a lot to be said about that because there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Can you talk a little bit about why you focus on that and sort of what your approach is?
Definitely, yeah. It's interesting. You know, my book, I wanted it to be comprehensive, so it covers agile development. It also covers UX design. I think what makes it probably the most distinct from other books is the going in depth on customer needs. And if you think about it, so for Lean Startup, we're formulating a bunch of hypotheses about who our customers are. And really, the most important hypotheses are what are the needs that we're going to try to address? What are the problems that they're having that aren't being adequately solved today? And so it can be kind of a fuzzy concept to think about or talk about, and I try to make it less fuzzy and again more of a science than an art. And related to that, probably one of the best ways to kind of think about and talk about customer needs is a concept I devote a chapter to called problem space versus solution space. And so problem space is when you're really thinking about what is that customer need, what are those customer problems that we're going to be addressing. Whereas in contrast, solution space is actually like the product that you've built to address those needs, or mock-ups or designs you come up with. And too many teams just don't really spend much time thinking in the problem space, and they just jump in and start building stuff. They're jumping into the solution space. And then later when they test the product and it doesn't do well, they kind of scratch their head. Whereas if you had articulated your hypotheses about, in the problem space, about, hey, our product's going to address these needs, then you have a framework to then, when you go out and talk to users and test, to go back and figure out which ones were valid, which ones weren't, and iterate from there.
Yeah, and your book actually has some really great specific examples of the problem space, solution space, because I think it's more complex than people think it is. So would you mind just pulling one of those out and telling?
Yeah.
There are a couple that I really liked, but I wanted
Definitely. Yeah, I'll mention those too. So the one that kind of works really well in the talks is basically when NASA, to illustrate this idea of problem space versus solution space, when NASA was sending astronauts into space, they knew that ballpoint pens weren't going to work because they rely on gravity for the ink to flow. And so they knew that wasn't going to work. And so they basically said, okay, we want a pen that writes in space. And it wasn't NASA. There's some people may go Google this, like some urban legend. It wasn't actually NASA that spent the money, but it was a contractor of theirs called Fisher, the Fisher Pen Company, that went out and proactively spent $1 million on R&D and invented this awesome space pen that actually writes in space. It does its job. And faced with the same challenge, the Russian Space Agency just gave their astronauts pencils. And you can actually buy a Russian space pen. It's a joke. It's like a pencil in a box. And the idea is just that by saying a pen that writes in space, by having that word pen in the articulation of the requirement, if you will, you've already constrained the solution space, right? A more abstract way to say it would be, we need something that writes in space, or we need a way to take notes in space. Would it be even better, where you're getting any kind of idea of what the solution to the problem is out of the requirements? The reality, and I tell that story a certain way to show, hey, if these two truly were equally acceptable alternatives, then obviously the one that didn't take $1 million of R&D and didn't take all that time to develop would be superior. The reality is there's reasons you don't want pencils in space. The lead breaks off and gets into things, and the wood is flammable. So at the end of the day, everyone uses the space pen. But the point of the story is to make sure when you're thinking about the problem space to not anchor or constrain yourself already with some solution in there. And the other example was from Intuit, and this would kind of help solidify this concept. I led Quicken Product Management. One of our other big products is TurboTax that helps people do their taxes. And at the time, it competed with another product called TaxCut. So they're both in the solution space because they're both products that actually deliver needs. And Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, used to always ask groups of product managers, hey, who's the biggest competitor for TurboTax? And everyone would raise their hand and say, it's TaxCut, it's TaxCut. And he'd say, actually, no, it's not. It's pen and paper. And the reality was more Americans were doing their taxes with pen and paper than either software solution. And so again, by getting clear on the problem space of, hey, helping people prepare their taxes, it helps you better understand all the true set of alternatives that customers have and help you think better about your product category.
Yeah, those are such great examples because I think it highlights the fact that in both examples, you're looking at the behavior and the action and not just the product itself, which is so important to remember. So can you also talk about the importance of having a clear value proposition, because that sort of goes right from customer need to then what exactly is the value of the product that you're putting together or you're thinking about?
Yeah, and that's the next step in the process. That's the next chapter. So, and with customer needs and problem space, we've kind of talked about a high level having a single overall need. The reality is it's It's like an onion. You keep peeling it and you get deeper and deeper and deeper as you learn about that problem space for your customers. Once you do that, you'll now have, like, tens or dozens of potential benefits that you could provide to your customers. And then the question becomes, okay, great, now we need to prioritize and figure out which ones are we actually going to do. Which ones are we going to say our product is going to be the best at, and which areas are we willing to seed or not focus on, right? And that's a value proposition. Your value proposition is basically, how does our product better meet these particular needs for our customers, right? And so it's basically the essence of product strategy, right? And there are companies out there where in the early stages, the startups will be talking to prospective customers, and they'll be like, hey, will your product do A? Oh, yeah, it'll definitely do A. And then you talk to someone else, will it do B? Oh, yeah, it's definitely going to do B. And then, ends up being this laundry list of all these features, whereas really product strategy, one of the best definitions is like you're saying no to something, right? And in the book I quote a lot, I have a few Steve Jobs quotes. He has, like, for every yes when they make a product design decision, there's 1,000 no's, he says, basically. And so the reality is, I think probably less than 10 or 5% of product teams actually go through this thought exercise of saying, okay, how are we going to be better or different than what's out there? And so I actually, from my lean manufacturing classes, there's a great model called the Kano model from Professor Kano from Japan. And so I use that as a framework to do your value proposition to figure out, okay, which benefits are we going to be outperforming our competitors on, and which ones are we, where are our unique delighters, where we can really create that positive value. And then once you get clear on that, then that forms the foundation of how you move forward with the key hypotheses that you're testing.
And you also mentioned in the book this idea of outside in versus inside out, which I think is also interesting, and just the perspective that you have to take when you're thinking about understanding the needs of your customers and then turning it into a valuable product. So MVP is a term that sparked a lot of debate. So what advice do you have for companies that are trying to determine what their MVP and what it means?
Yeah, it's a great concept, right? Minimum viable product. And I just laugh because if you go out there and read blog posts, you can literally find a blog post. It's like, a landing page is not an MVP. That's the title of the post. And then someone wrote and responded to it, a landing page is an MVP. Yeah, it's just like these flame wars out there.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I did, actually didn't show that slide, but was just to create a framework that encompasses all of those ideas. So it actually teases apart the differences. And I use the term MVP tests to get away from MVP, because what trips people up is the P in product in MVP. And so if it's a landing page, they scratch their head and go, that's not really a product. But the reality is it's a test that lets you test your hypotheses. So I kind of came up with a framework that lets you do both of those. But let me share this other framework real quick, which I adapted actually from Aaron Walters, who wrote a great book called Designing for Emotion. And then another designer called Jussi Pasanen adapted that. And so one way to think about your product is a simple framework. Again, it's hierarchical, where you've got 4 aspects of your product. You've got the functional aspects. That's basically like, okay, which benefits is it solving for people? Reliability is the next tier up, which is, hey, does it work as expected? Does it work when I need to be? Is the quality high? Next level up is usability. Can I actually use it? It's great that it has the functionality. It's reliable, but can I actually use it? How easy is it to use? And then increasingly you hear people the last several years talking about delight and products being delightful, which is great. So it's above and beyond like, can I use it, which is what usability answers. It's like, do I want to use it? Does it evoke a positive emotional response? And so the idea is you can kind of assess a product using this four-layer framework. And the biggest mistake I see people do is to use MVP as an excuse to do this, where everyone knows you can't build the whole pyramid right away, but they basically build a subset of the functionality, which is what they should do, instead of going off and coding for a year and then launching it and watching it fail. But they use it as an excuse to not focus on quality or not worry about ease of use or UX design. And so not surprisingly, when you go and test those kind of MVPs, they don't do well, and you just kind of get stuck. In contrast, what you want to do, you do want to have a slice, only work on a slice, because we're trying to get the minimum viable product here. But you need to focus on a subset of functionality, but make sure the quality, usability, and delight are adequate, so that when you test it, you can get valid customer feedback. And tying it back to value prop, the specific set of functionality you should test is to make sure you've got those differentiators in your MVP and not just testing like Me Too features with people. But anyway, that's one of the ways I see people misuse MVP, is just having a buggy, kind of hard to use product which doesn't test well.
Have you seen in your experiences, any examples of MVPs that are not digital, that's not software, that's an actual, service, or something that's in the real world? And because I think that it's expanded, this lean startup has expanded so much beyond software development and technology. So I'm just wondering if you've had any of those conversations or have seen a real world example of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. These days we have like really robust mobile prototyping tools, and in general that's what I advise when I say, hey, don't build your product, don't jump in and start building. The answer is prototypes, where you're just designing and you can move more quickly without using valuable engineering resources, and it's easier to change. Before we had those robust prototyping tools, I remember people kind of like in the Palm days, they literally would have a strip of paper that they would run through. They would run through as if that was the screen and have people do it. So that's kind of paper prototyping is one way where we're not getting digital. The other aspects are like the concierge, MVP, where you're basically doing things manually that you intend to automate later. So, Zappos is a big example of that, where the founder would just take the orders, go to the shoe store, buy them, and then mail them to people. So there are definitely good ways to hack, and that's actually one of the biggest things, again, with my clients. I'll sit down with product teams, and they love Lean Startup, they love MVP, and they'll say, Dan, we've got an MVP. Let me show you what your MVP is. And then I'll find ways that there are ways to make it even less scope than what they thought. You just have to push your thinking. Actually, a great example, I thought of a guy I met at one of my workshops. He didn't have a coding background at all. He didn't have any tech background, but he had an idea for this kind of green energy product, or carbon offsets and things like that. And I was like, okay, well, what's your plan? He's like, well, I'm gonna hire a developer, a Java developer, and have them build a website for me. And the guy had never done dev. I'm like, I can see how this is gonna play out. You're gonna spend a lot of money, and you're not gonna, probably not, no one hits the bullseye with their V1 product. It's kind of folly to try to do that. So I said instead, I'm like, well, why don't you do a Kickstarter? This is all about people just signing up for your value proposition. Why don't you do a Kickstarter? And he didn't know about Kickstarter, so I explained it to him, and it totally worked out. So you got a Kickstarter page, no development costs, no money out of his pocket, and then he brought his iPad to a convention at Moscone of it was like an alternative energy conference, and he just brought his Kickstarter page around, and he showed it to people and got feedback, and he didn't have to spend a dime. It was great.
That's a great example. People are getting really, with help, getting really creative about how they can do that. The Zappos example is also a really good one. Just good story. So I'm gonna ask you two questions that are coming from the audience, just because they have to do with MVP.
Sure.
They're coming up. So the first one is, does delightful map directly to useful? Which I think is an interesting question.
Does delightful map to useful?
Yeah.
I think that there are distinct layers in that pyramid for a reason. So they're related. That's a hierarchical model, and that's the thing in the book and in my talk. I'll get into how when you're talking about customer needs, there's actually hierarchies where if one need isn't met, it doesn't matter how well you do on some other need, right? So the bottom line here, the kind of stereotypical example here is you have some beautiful mobile app or some beautiful website. It's just the visual design is awesome, and the colors and the graphics looks great, but you can't use it. Right, so in that sense they're related, and if basically if you recall from the pyramid, useful was below delightful. So the whole point is, in order to have a truly delightful product, it has to be usable, and it has to be reliable, and it has to be functional. So it's a hierarchical model. So they are related, but in order to provide delight, you have to provide usability, basically.
Yep. Great. And then the second question is, what is the difference between MVP and MLP, minimum lovable product? Have you heard that before?
Yeah, I have, of course. Yeah, sure. It's just funny because, product market fit, everyone uses the term, but there's no definition. And there's no disagreement, really, because there's no definition. MVP, you see this wide range of definitions. People are passionate. People have negative connotations or reactions because they misunderstand what it's about. And so they don't like the minimum. Basically, people that don't understand, a lot of them don't like the minimum. I've heard people say the maximum viable product. I went to a big company and I was speaking to them, and they're like, well, we want you to come talk about Lean Startup Principles. Just so you know, they don't really like the term MVP. We actually call it the maximum viable product. And I'm like, okay. I didn't really take that one on. But so minimum lovable product, all that's trying to do, it's actually exactly conveying the point that I made, which is so many people use MVP as an excuse to have a shoddy product where they haven't focused a lot on UX and delight. And so minimum lovable product just means, yeah, above, yes, you're only building a subset of functionality, but you're going to have a good UX design that hopefully creates a delightful user experience. So it's the same idea.
Yep.
Basically.
Just as sort of a different emphasis on one over the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lovable is kind of delight.
Yep. And now I'm going to take another question because it's related to the Kickstarter example. So the question is, why Kickstarter? Why not just a mock website?
Okay, like, this is what I like to do. Like, I literally like to just imagine you have a stopwatch and you have person A creating a Kickstarter page. It takes them like 10 minutes to create a Kickstarter page. Person B has to go create a website. You do the stopwatch. It's going to take them a few days or a week to do it. It's like, the reason why is because you don't have to.
Yeah.
That's why, because there's a quicker path and an easier path. Now, there are tools like WordPress is a great tool, so that the cost and time to stand up a website has definitely gone down, and sometimes that's appropriate if Kickstarter isn't appropriate. But if all you need is basically a page that presents your value proposition and gives you a great way to see if people are willing to shell out money and pay, Kickstarter meets that need basically. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
Other tools I'll mention, if for some reason Kickstarter isn't good, like landing page tools like Unbounce, that's a good way to do it too. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal now. You don't actually have to build a website. They have these landing page tools where you can just build your landing page to test your value proposition.
That's great. Okay, so in thinking about the maximum viable product and vernacular that especially larger corporations use because they like to, they use their own language in a lot of places. So in addition to working with startups, you've helped larger companies with lean startup principles. So what are the techniques you've used? And and also I know that they're different between large established companies and startups. You sort of approach them differently. So what are some of the techniques that you use to motivate change in larger companies and get people to start executing on their ideas?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a company that's been operating for a while, and they see lean startup principles and they realize they want to do that. That's like step one. And it may be the executives or a key executive that wants to do that. And so a lot of times it's tops down. And it's not like there's active resistance from people at the lower levels of the org, but they just don't necessarily understand because they're not familiar with the concept. So step one is just getting buy-in and explaining why are we doing this, right? And a lot of times the forcing functions will be, gosh, the pace of our development has just gotten very slow. Or, gosh, the last few products we've launched haven't done so well, kind of being honest about results. And that's where, just metrics, are a kind of objective way to look at that. So one is just making sure everyone understands why we're doing it, what are we trying to accomplish, versus, hey, it's just the management flavor of the month, what we're doing this month. So that's one. And at the end of the day, related to that, it's a lot of communication. It's just a lot of reinforcement when you're trying to affect change. And then coaching people on the principles. And then the other thing, kind of similar to the MVP, is not biting off too much. So you can try to change a whole org of 100, 200 people at once. It might be difficult. And so one of the techniques is kind of the pilot idea, where you take a team, you identify a project that's relatively autonomous, and you say, okay, great, we're going to test out these methodologies, new methodologies with this team. We're going to empower them. We're going to give them the resources to do it, and see how it goes. Because a lot of times the process needs to be tailored for that particular org or the space that they're working in. So that gives it a chance. And then if you can get a win, it's like Jeffrey Moore's bowling pin analogy. If that pilot team can get a win and launch a product that does well in the marketplace and is done quickly, then everyone can point to that and say, see, they used those techniques and they got that win. And it kind of helps build that social proof, so then you can expand it within the org.
So we got a question that's sort of related to this, and I'm not sure what the answer will be, but I'm going to tell you the question.
Me neither.
So I'm going to edit it a little bit. So any tips on so it's basically a question between sales guys on the front lines that are saying yes to customer requests, and then going back to development and saying we need to build all these features.
Oh yeah.
How do you get some collaboration there so everybody's sort of focused on the same process and can apply the lean principle? That seems to be a point of frustration for some people.
Yeah, and so different companies have different emphasis, and in a sales-driven organization like that, you can often get situations where sales can basically say, hey, I just signed this $5 million contract, here's what you need to build. That happens. That can happen in kind of sales-driven organizations, and it's not it's not fun. And the reason it's not fun is because they're usually not 100% right? A lot of times, and this is part of the problem also when you're teasing apart the problem space and customer needs. A big part of it is watching users, watching customers, and listening to them, and not taking what they say at face value. They may say, you know what, we really need a button on this page that does this. We really need a button on this page. And then you put the button on the page, and then lo and behold, it doesn't do what they need, and they don't know what they need to do. Then they're just unhappy, and there's like, hey, it's like, hey, we just did what you told us. So when you're in the solution space, just doing things verbatim that people tell you to do, you lose why. And again, it's like the spaceman. If you just take a step back and say, okay, why do you guys want that button? Oh, we need to import the files into Excel. It's like, why do you need to import the files Excel? Well, because the reporting tool doesn't let us graph it the way we want. Okay, why don't we go fix the reporting tool to graph it the way you want, so you don't have to export it to Excel. You discover those kind of things when you have those kind of moderated discussions with customers, and you tease apart problem space and solution space. And so one thing that people do is try to put in rules and policies so that sales can't commit features without consulting with engineering and product management. That's just a simple kind of policy thing. That's one thing you can do. And the other thing that can happen in those kind of situations is you start building one-offs for each customer, right? This customer wants A, this customer wants B, this customer wants C, and you end up with this like Winchester Mystery House product. Whereas instead, if you could say, okay, we want to be strategic here, we want to build things that apply to multiple customers. Let's look across and find the patterns of things that are going to hit like 80% of customers and focus on that. You can better use your resources that way. So a lot of times it may be an absence of product strategy, and if there's no tops-down kind of high-level product strategy, then you're just kind of tactically selling whatever people will buy. So putting policies in place so that there's got to be cross-functional agreement before sales commits to new features is a good tactic, and then having some kind of high-level business product strategy that can guide what we're going to. Again, strategy is saying no to things, right?
Right.
And it can be hard to say no to a big check, but the reality is, if you have an honest conversation, a lot of times sales is often afraid to say no to a customer, and they're afraid to get into that conversation and just say, no, if they want that button, let's just put that button there. So part of it is having active conversations with the customer to understand their needs, and being able to like reasonably push back on things that don't make sense or don't apply to other customers.
It also sounds like there's value in because if you can't change the policies necessarily of your organization, but taking a step back and then trying to teach or coach maybe the sales team on why the lean startup, or why the practice is really important, so that they sort of can approach it a little bit differently as well. So the coaching and the training obviously goes a long way.
And you can co-opt them too, right? Obviously the sales and other customer-facing roles like customer support, customer service, they deal with customers all the time, and so they actually are a great source of customer insight. And one of the issues is they almost always, because they're not trained in these techniques, they will take what the request is at face value, right? And not take it at face value versus saying, hey, what's the motivation, what's the underlying requirement? There might be a better, cheaper way to solve that. And secondly, they tend to take one issue at a time versus taking a more strategic view across all of them. But they can be great, so they should be cross-functional members of the team as well. When you're trying to figure out what customers are we trying to help, what are we trying to do for them, they should be involved in those discussions.
Yeah, that's a great point. So a couple more questions are coming in. We're tackling client experience on products that are more service-based. Can you help us understand how you applied this to a product that isn't software and involved more human touch, which is sort of what I asked a little bit earlier, but tackling client experience on products that are service-based versus... Yeah,
I missed the very first part of the question, Kirsten. Sorry. What was
it? They're saying they're tackling a client experience on products that are more service-based.
Okay.
Can you help us understand how to apply this to a product that isn't software and involves more human touch or human contact?
It's the same thing. I mean, basically, the only thing that's kind of unique or distinct is like creating a digital prototype of your product. But the key word is prototype. If you abstract out prototype means basically something that resembles what we expect the product or service to be. And so when you're doing a service, say, it ends up being like, okay, what's the workflow we're going to use for people? What are the scripts we're going to say to people if they ask for this? And what are the steps in the process of how we provide this service? That's a prototype, basically. So it's, the ideas of who's your target customer, what are their unmet needs, those don't apply whether you have a digital product or not. They apply either way. Same thing, how is our service going to be better or different than the other services that are out there? Those apply. So it really just gets down to, okay, how do we test our assumptions? and create a prototypical customer experience, whether it's a digital product or a service. And in many ways, it's great because it's a human service, you're having face-to-face interaction with your customers every single time, right? Whereas with digital products, you've got to go out of your way to set up user testing sessions. So in a way, it's an advantage because you're living the process, you're living the service that you're providing, and your customers are right there, and they can give you feedback in real time. So, but the general concepts apply, and it's just a matter of how are you prototyping what you're thinking about for your service.
Awesome. So another question is, how do you evaluate that your MVP was successful?
Yeah, so that's right. And so that's the funny thing is, when you first do it, when you first create your V1, your idea V1 prototype, the V is viable. The customer is who determines that it's viable. So at that point, I like to call it an MVP candidate. It's like what you think is going to be viable. Like you've tried to make it minimal. But they have to say it is. And so you'll test it, basically. So that, and I talk in the book, and this is what I'll talk about in my talk, about going out and doing waves of 5 to 8 customers at a time with your prototype of your MVP and getting feedback on it. And when you get feedback on it, you'll get a range of feedback. And this is the thing about also problem space and customer needs. When customers talk about things, they don't always use the same terms. They're not very precise. People are talking at different levels of being very specific or very general, and so you have to kind of parse. A lot of it is just good listening and user research skills and listening to what people are saying. But at the end of the day, when you show them your prototype and you get feedback, you can kind of tease it apart onto 3 different dimensions. One is functionality. So they may say, okay, your site is supposed to do X, but I don't see a way to do Y on this, which is a critical task that I need to be able to do. So you're missing a key functionality. Or there may be a piece of functionality that you think is really important and going to be valuable, but then you test it with people and they go, well, actually, I don't think I would use that. I don't see how that creates value for me. So those are kind of functionality level feedback. The second is UX design. You may have the right feature set, but people can't find the feature on your website, because the navigation isn't clear or the information architecture isn't clear. Or they can find it, but they can't use it. Like the UX design just isn't usable enough. Those are UX design level feedback. And then the third, which doesn't get talked about a lot, is actually messaging. So especially with the V1 product, the way you're talking about things, the way you're explaining what your product does and who it's for may not resonate. You may be using terms that don't resonate with people. So in the book, I talk about a way to tease apart the issues you're finding along those 3 dimensions, track it within a wave across the 5 to 8 people, and you're kind of doing what I call it semi-quant or quant on qual. A lot of people are excited about A/B testing and having large sample size and statistical significance. When you're doing a V1 product, you don't have thousands of customers yet. So the best you can do is talking to people, and you can still do percentages. So if I run like a group of 8 people through a prototype, and 5 of them or 6 of them tell me, hey, you're missing this key feature, then even though I've only talked to 8 people, I don't go, geez, I don't know. I wonder if it's not statistically significant. I don't know if I really need to build that feature. Like, yeah. Right? In the extreme cases, 8 out of 8 tell you. Or like basically 4 people couldn't get through your flow. Well, 50% is pretty bad. So, so there's a way to kind of gauge the magnitude of the issues. So kind of systematically document the issues, gauge the magnitude, and then at the end, kind of ask some general questions on a quantitative scale. Hey, how valuable did you find this product? How well did this product meet your needs? And how easy to use was it? And then after that wave, you take your feedback, you go back, you revise your hypotheses, you iterate your prototypes, and then you go do another wave. And as you do that wave over wave, you should see a couple things happen. One, the overall number of negative issues that people bring up or complaints goes down. The magnitude of the complaints goes down. And then hopefully the number and magnitude of positive comments goes up, right? You'll start. And an interesting thing there is, for example, you may have usability issues that are just preventing people from seeing the value that your product has. And once you address those, your scores will go up quite a bit because now people can actually see it and use it.
And so related to that, I'm thinking as you're talking, a lot of people talk about timelines because you want to get products to market really fast, you want to get in the hands of your customers. Is there sort of a common denominator for how long it should take you to run through that first test and then look at the data and decide what you're going to do next, whether you iterate or pivot or start over or give up? I mean, so what is sort of a general timeline or for that testing and then going on to the next, and how do you have a sense of what a good sample size is for user testing? I know it depends on the product, but just
Yeah, I recommend 5 to 8, and there's a lot of research out there for usability studies about with 5 people you're going to catch like 80% of major issues. So I recommend like 5 to 8. It's enough. Like if you only talk to 3 or 4, you don't know if it's idiosyncratic feedback or if it really applies to more people. 5 to 8 is enough to see patterns. Beyond 8, you're just going to see more of the same, and you just want to kind of cut it off so you can react and fix things, and then like rinse and repeat with the new set of customers again. As far as the time frame, I mean, you can line these tests up. Each test usually runs about 45 minutes or an hour. So you can load up a day or two and get your testing done in like 1 to 3 days if you schedule it well. You can debrief it in a day with your team, and then there's the variable factors depending on the magnitude and the issues. Like if there's just like a couple little tweaks you need, like maybe it's the 3rd round of iteration, those couple of tweaks may be very quick. If it's the 1st or 2nd time around, it's like, wow, people really need feature X. You gotta go design that, figure out how it fits into your design. So it's a little variable on how you fix the feedback, but as far as getting the feedback and processing it, that should just take, should be able to do within, like I said, 3 to 5 days.
Yeah. So here's another question. How do you know your product, sort of related, how do you know your product has been delightful? How do you measure the delight index?
Yeah, so, and in the book I share a great framework from a UX designer called Christian Rohr that breaks up, I mentioned quantitative and qualitative. I mentioned how when you have a V1 product, you don't have thousands of people that you can test with, right? So it's much more qualitative. And I call that dichotomy Oprah versus Spock. So Oprah is a great interviewer. She's talking to people, figuring out what they're all about. Spock is the numbers guy, the quantitative guy. The other dimension is attitudinal versus behavioral. And so he's got a great 2x2 framework of qualitative, quantitative, attitudinal, behavior. Attitudinal is you tell me what you're going to do, or you tell me your opinion. Behavioral is just you kind of objectively observe customer behavior. And so there's again, if your product isn't live, you won't have behavioral data, but you can ask people. So you can ask them questions at the end of the study like, how valuable was that to you? How easy to use was the product? How much did you enjoy the user experience? And these are, the risk with attitudinal questions is people can, sometimes they're not even deliberately lying. They're just telling you they don't really know the accurate assessment. They're just telling you, and a lot of times in user tests, people kind of sugarcoat things. They don't want to say bad things. So they're like, oh yeah, that was great, right? So on the attitudinal front, one thing I saw, a test I did back in 2006, like very much lean startup style before the book came out even, was, before the ideas were out, was we did this test and we ran these prototypes, and the first wave, we kind of asked people how interested they were, and it was very lukewarm. A lot of people were like, no, this isn't interesting, and other people were like, this we're lukewarm at best. And we asked people if they would pay, which again, you're asking people if they would pay. It's kind of a little suspect, but we got bad answers. People weren't even lying, saying they willing to pay. And then we took all the feedback. I have 8 pages of notes of feedback, and we methodically fixed each thing, and we pivoted. We basically changed the and we pivoted, and we methodically addressed all the questions or concerns they had. And then at the end of that second test, this time around, they were just kind of like nodding their head as we're going through their prototypes, which was great. And then at the end, I said, hey, would you be willing to pay $10 a month for the service? And this time around, much better results of what they said they would pay. And then I was like, great, here's your check. Thank you for your time. Here's your check for your time. And then I think all the candidates except for one was basically like, so can I use this product? Is this out now? And I had to be like, no, we're actually working on it. It'll be out soon. It's like, can I give you my phone number? Can I give you my email? Can you ping me? So that's like, we were done with the test, but they clearly saw product market fit there, or if you want to call it the light, right? And then the attitudinal measure, the quantitative attitudinal measure is, and I talk about this in the book, is retention rate. So the percentage of people that come back and use your product after using it the first time. And if you've created a delightful product that has product market fit, you'll see that repeat engagement and that retention rate. And retention rate is basically a quantitative measure of product market fit at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that result is actually kind of the ideal result, that you do the testing and everybody's like, so where can I buy it? Mm-hmm. That's great. That's
right. Which is the beauty of like a Kickstarter, because then they can actually pull out their wallet and pay. It's not them saying they're going to pay. They will pull out their wallet and pay.
Yeah, that's true. That's truly like direct to your target market, and it works or it doesn't. It's pretty simple. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a question here, and I think it's it might be hard to answer, but it goes back to sort of the culture, the experience we've had with organizations and cultural change management. Who should own the no? And I think that depends on the organization, obviously. But do you have any response to that, or have you sort of had to, sort of advise people on that?
So who has the power to say no to a feature request?
Who should own it? Yeah.
That's interesting, and it fundamentally gets at what I was saying. Like, some organizations are more sales-driven, and so if the VP of sales says, we got to build this, the CEO is always going to go their way, right?
Yeah.
Others are engineering-centric, where whatever the engineers think is the right thing, is cool to build or whatever, then they're going to win the majority of debates or escalations, right? So, I'm a product manager, so I think product manager should decide. But product management's job is to basically take input from all those other parts of the org to facilitate coming up with the best decisions. It's not like we're unilaterally saying, oh, you should do this, you should not do this, right? And it's our job, it's a product leader's job to basically project out into the future a bit and think about product strategy and facilitate that discussion with the executive team, right? The CEO, the sales, marketing, engineering, design, and again, basically that's part of when you've got a clear product strategy and a clear vision, and everyone's aligned on it. It makes decision making a lot easier, right? And so then it's like not one person saying no. It's like, no, remember that was our strategy. We agreed we're not pursuing that market. We're not pursuing that. And so then it's like the team is hopefully collectively bought in that they're going to say no on that. So I think obviously at the end of the day, it's kind of the CEO or the GM where the buck stops, but a good product leader is able to create a strategy that makes it easy to say no.
It's a great answer. Okay, so I just want to wrap it up by talking a little bit about what you're going to talk about at the conference. Can you give us a little sort of description of what your session will be, your interactive presentation will be like?
Yeah, so like we were saying, it's an hour long. We want to make it highly interactive. We don't have time to do a full-on workshop, but there'll be very interactive, a lot of Q&A with the audience, and people can bring up examples. But it's basically the stuff we talked about today in our webcast. It's all these ideas. So the product market fit pyramid and the lean product process. And what I do in the talk and the workshop is actually walk people through that step by step to explain each step with examples. And then at the end, I have a case study, which people find very helpful to actually see, okay, let's take this an end-to-end real-world example, which is the one that I was mentioning where after we pivoted one round, people were like, hey, this is great. So that's pretty much what I walked through. We didn't get time today to talk about within customer needs, how you prioritize which ones you're going to address and which ones are most underserved. I have a framework called Importance versus Satisfaction that I get into. I cover the Kano model, as I mentioned, which is a way to classify customer benefits and features into must-haves, performance, features, and delighters, and that forms the basis for the value proposition. So just walking people through, obviously not in as much depth as the book, but walking them through the 6 steps of the process and then highlighting it with an example.
Great. So it would be good for people to come to the session with some challenges to think about as they're sitting in there, and maybe they can work on it a little bit.
Definitely, yeah, and definitely bring, just like people were asking great questions here, bring in those questions like that they're facing at each of those steps in the process, and we can address them.
Okay, awesome. One more question came through that we have time to ask. So before we wrap up, this is the final question. At what stage will a startup know that the product has been perfected and look to scale up? And maybe not time to answer this in a quick few minutes, but
no, it is. No, the funny thing is I love the word perfected because you're never done, right? It's like, so the real question is at what point should we scale, right? And so Sean Ellis has a great framework, right? And the whole point is after product market fit. You don't want to scale before product market fit, right? So until you are getting that positive response from your target customers, like positive feedback, people saying they love it, recommending it to their friends, and you see with the metrics, you see the retention rate, the repeat usage. When you get to that point, then you know you can scale. But scaling before that is premature because you haven't achieved product market fit yet.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this today. It was fantastic to talk to you, and I am looking forward to having you at the conference and the session that you're gonna lead. It'll be great.
Thanks a lot, Kirsten. It's been a pleasure, and thanks to all the people that asked the great questions. I look forward to seeing you guys in person at the Lean Startup Conference.
So back to you, Jeanette.
Thanks to everyone joining us today. This wraps up our show. Please join us again for the next webcast on October 8th. In the meantime, visit leanstartup.co for more information on the Lean Startup Conference, November 16th through 19th in San Francisco. Thanks so much, and goodbye.